On two separate occasions, I have attempted to review the 1986 classic Metroid on the NES, and both of those videos were not so great. The first one from 2019 was released on September 11th. That date, and was the first ever retrospective I gave for a game. It could use some work. It was unscripted, barely edited, and I barely knew what I was trying to say half the time. I gave the game a second look at the start of 2022, and this video fares a bit better. The video quality still sucks, but it's got an actual script this time, only a couple of editing mistakes, and overall was a pretty good video for coming out before I got a capture card later that year and the quality of my videos shot up. Now, in both of these retrospectives, my opinion hadn't changed all that much, even if the manner in which I presented it was different. Allow 2022 me to give a basic summary.
Metroid is a game that was already outdated as soon as it was released, and some of its problems aren't even a result of NES limitations, it's just bad game design. So yes, I would consider Metroid an extremely flawed and poorly designed game, but it had so much potential.
Since the moment I became a Metroid fan, thanks to Samus Returns on 3DS back in 2017, I had held this opinion of the original NES game. Not only had it aged poorly just like most NES games, but it wasn't even that good to begin with. And while I would enjoy Super Metroid and Metroid Prime, have a blast in Metroid Fusion and Samus Returns, absolutely adore Metroid Zero Mission and Dread, and completely ignore Metroid 2 until 2025, I would always see Metroid NES as nothing more than a failed first attempt at what would otherwise be a masterpiece of a series. That is, until much more recently. By the time this video actually releases, Metroid Prime 4 will have finally arrived. As of writing this script, it's still a week away, but in the time leading up to this long-awaited title's release, I had become a Metroid fan, saw a full console generation come and go through elementary school, then middle school, and now I'm a semester away from graduating high school. I've started this channel, have uploaded for over 7 years, and have gone from 9 years old at the game's announcement to 18 years old at the time of its release. And all this time, my opinion of Metroid NES has stayed pretty much the exact same. But in the past month or so, with that long-awaited Prime 4 on the horizon, I've given this series' first title one last chance. I've replayed it a lot, about 6 times in the past couple of weeks, more than doubling how many times I had played through it before deciding to make this video. I've taken multiple approaches to my playthroughs as well, acting as a completely new player unfamiliar with Metroid, with no access to the internet and nothing but their wits in the original manual, something I've never considered in my previous retrospectives on this game. And I've also acted as an experienced player after multiple playthroughs, trying to beat the game as quickly as possible, which is what I've become now. And after analyzing these 59 kilobytes deeper than I ever have before, I can safely say that I was so wrong about Metroid NES. Let's say that we are a completely new player. Metroid couldn't afford to explain our mission through more than a poorly translated screen of text, and so in order to explain what we actually have to do throughout the rest of the game without us having to resort to the manual constantly, it needs to subtly hint at the right direction through the environment, or perhaps the left direction. If we head right like you do in most side-scrollers, you'll quickly hit a dead end. The very first thing you need to do to progress in Metroid NES is go left. The Morph Ball immediately teaches you this game's open-ended nature compared to most NES games, and the importance of exploration. Not everything will be solved by blindly pushing in one direction, and that's the first rule you will learn on how to play a Metroid game, taught to you within the first couple of minutes. The enemies here are annoyingly hard to hit, due to Samus's limited capabilities from the start. You can only shoot left, right, and up. No crouching, no diagonal firing, and definitely no 360-degree shooting either. Now, I will admit that this does feel a bit too limiting, even if you haven't been spoiled yet by better aiming. Because the enemies are typically too low to hit, you will need to get creative on how to kill them, such as waiting for them to climb up a wall or along a ceiling. Health drops from killing enemies could probably be more frequent, but as long as you're fighting most enemies you see, you'll likely heal up enough by the time you get to where you're going. Though perhaps starting the player with only 30 health was a bit too harsh as opposed to, 70. It doesn't give the player much chance to truly get used to the combat due to how punishing getting hit is at this point in the game. Now, if we climb up this vertical shaft, we will come across a door, but platforms entice us to go further up the screen. And if we've learned anything from the very start of the game, the solution isn't just to only hold right all the time. So we keep climbing upwards and come across a door on the left. We've learned that left can be good, so we head inside and whoa, this place looks special. If the music and tile change don't give that away, perhaps this red door will. Nothing we can do right now will open it. Well, perhaps this will be like the morph ball situation, and we'll eventually find a power-up that lets us open red doors. Let's remember this area for later, which will be our second rule in how to play Metroid. Remember, dead ends, because they typically aren't dead ends. Our intrigue will probably rise further if we keep climbing up the blue tunnel and find another red door at the end of this hallway. So yeah, we'll definitely come back here soon. We do eventually go right and find ourselves in a yellow copy of the tunnel we were just in. Even if there's a door to our right, let's try heading up again first. Another door with a new green area. Another dead end though, so let's head back down and enter that first door on the right that we saw. After a couple rooms with acid, I think, and some enemies that are kinda hard to kill, they take a lot of hits, we get ourselves an energy tank. Our max health has just doubled, and if that doesn't make you feel a whole lot more powerful, I don't know what does. Don't think that this single energy tank means you can start tanking hits willy-nilly, just that you have a bit more leeway in this hostile world. There's another one of these special rooms with a red door on the right end of this area, so we need to remember this place too. Nowhere else to go from here, so we'll have to backtrack a bit. This is likely your first major backtracking moment, even if it's just down a single hallway. But by having us remember two important rooms on opposite ends of the area, which if we check the manual we learn is called Brinstar, the game encourages us to get a good sense of direction and location. Either you start building a map of the game in your head, or you do the arguably smarter thing and start drawing one yourself. Hell, even the manual tells you to do this, because it's not like its map will help you much at all. And again, this encouragement has been done completely without words, if you ignore the manual, executed just by positioning points of interest at certain spots on the map. Heading back to the first golden tunnel, we pick the last direction we haven't tried yet, down. Heading that way, we'll find ourselves missiles. With so few buttons on an NES controller, you'll figure out how to switch to missiles pretty quickly. Besides the fact that they kill enemies faster, you might not notice their use at first, especially with how low your missile capacity is. Heading right for just a bit longer, we find an elevator, something we haven't seen before now. And by heading down this elevator, Metroid will drill into our heads the consequences of blindly pushing ahead. Dear player, welcome to Norfair. Perhaps it's called that because it's no fair. Get it? You could try to explore here and find a couple missile tanks to increase your capacity by doing so, but you'll quickly learn that you probably shouldn't be here right now. The game does a good job of warning you about this with its harsh sounding music, though it does sound kind of drunk, or is that just me? And enemies that deal a lot of damage and take forever to kill. You also find more dead ends, though these seem significantly more dead compared to the ones you found in Brinstar. A few do have promise though, like, why do your shots phase through certain parts of this wall? If you do try exploring every way you can though, you'll most likely die, and when you respawn, you're back at the elevator, just begging you to leave Norfair and come back later, and you really should. At the same time though, dying brought your health back down to just 30 energy, which as I've said before, is a bit too low, especially for this particular room in Brinstar that you'd have to traverse to next, and probably die in as well. It gets more punishing the more you upgrade your energy, because of just how long it takes to get back to max health. So just don't die, you may say, but the problem is that you need to die in order to get to the password screen, which is used instead of normal saving in the American version of this game. You could have at the very least respawned us with like half health or something. Anyways, with everything leading to a dead end, let's head back to those points of interest, specifically the first one we found in the blue tunnel. The only thing we haven't tried on this red door is shooting a missile, so let's see what happens. Nothing. This moment is NES Metroid's biggest mistake. The fact that it takes 5 missiles to open red doors is told to you only in the manual, and is not explained anywhere else in the game. No special sound effect or animation to tell you you're doing anything right. No counter above the door ticking down until enough missiles have been fired, nothing. Perhaps the red door having a slight color change when swapping the missiles can indicate something, but nothing says that 5 missiles are needed. I also consider this a minor issue in the other Metroid games that take 5 missiles to open doors, such as Super Metroid, but in those games, this mechanic is forced upon you much quicker than in NES, where you're given a giant open map from the get-go, which would lead the player to assume that they just haven't explored enough yet, not that they already have the solution. I've expressed this issue since my very first retrospective back in 2019. I repeated it in 2022, and I still find this a major issue now. While I consider most of my previously stated opinions on Metroid NES to be wrong, I still hold this one in particular to be something I got right. I wouldn't be surprised if the frustration with this moment is why I would choose to see Metroid NES so negatively in its other aspects, even the ones I find good now. If we do figure out how to open red doors, we find our first power-up in a long time, the long beam. Finally, shooting enemies on the roof has never been easier, and heading back the way we came demonstrates its usefulness immediately. There's also this weird pipe we can roll through, but nothing on the other side. But wait, if this special looking room contained an upgrade, what about the similar room on the other end of Brinstar? So we head all the way back over there and get ourselves Morph Ball Bombs. Just like with the long beam, the game immediately demonstrates their usefulness in killing these crawling enemies, which will likely also show us how bombs can bounce the morph ball upwards. Neat. On our way back to our third point of interest, the one at the very top of the blue tunnel, we might notice something odd about this room. Wait a minute, why is there an enemy below the floor that I can't reach? And how is it dipping under the lava slash acid slash whatever? Could I blow up this enemy through the floor using bombs? This changes everything. While the red doors were Metroid NES's biggest mistake, I'd argue that this moment right here is the game's greatest moment of genius, because it teaches you the third and fourth rules of Metroid in one moment. Number 3, secrets are everywhere and sometimes mandatory. This is likely how you will first find the ice beam, which lets you freeze enemies and use them like platforms. This upgrade is essential to the progression, and you just found it from bombing a random part of the floor. Now all of those dead ends in Norfair don't look so dead anymore, do they? I presented this as a complaint back in 2022, but that's because I was missing the fourth and final rule. The environment will guide you, even if it's subtle. This enemy being in an unreachable spot makes us ask whether that spot really is unreachable, and when curiosity gets the better of us, we find what we're looking for. The player has felt like they found the secret all on their own, but really, the game has always been there to silently and gently tap us in the right direction, even if we barely notice it ourselves. I really have to give props to the devs for figuring this stuff out. It must have been very tempting to force the player down a much more linear and obvious path, yet this game has managed to teach us about secrets with just an enemy placement. Just as it has silently taught us the 4 rules on how to play Metroid, which will be our guiding light throughout the rest of our adventure, and will remain with us in any future Metroid game that we play. When we finally do head to that third port of interest, the red door at the top of the blue tunnel, we find this room with 2 statues. According to the manual, these are the statues of the game's 2 main bosses, and we'll have to kill both of them to progress here. Okay, cool. Perhaps this isn't indicated too well by the game itself, but it will likely make more sense after actually defeating the bosses themselves. Though, for all the praise I just gave this game for the ice beam moment, I do have to ask, was the inescapable death pit really necessary? A lot of the world is opened up to us at this point, though there's really 2 main directions we can go in. One of them is down this bombable floor and into the Brinstar depths, where Kraid resides. We have a similar experience to our first trek into Norfair, where everything just kicks our butt. Unlike Norfair though, I'm able to see plenty of branching paths to explore, just paths we can't get far in without dying. The game had taught us about blindly pushing, so perhaps after grabbing a few good upgrades we can reach easily, including some really clever ones found by putting our new rules to good use, we should probably leave and come back later. Perhaps now that we're more powerful, entering Norfair will be more rewarding. On our way there, however, as I take a detour to re-explore the upper green area of Brinstar and get some more upgrades, I want to mention why entering Norfair now will be more rewarding. Have you noticed anything about yourself at this point? Not with Samus, but with you. You've gotten better at the game, not just knowledge-wise, but skill-wise. A happy consequence of Samus's limited moveset is that it's very quick to learn, and so by having a zigzag back and forth throughout the map, sure it can feel a bit tedious or repetitive at times, we get the chance to get a good sense of handling with Samus. She's very floaty in this game, and the amount of control you get out of a jump depends on whether you hopped in place or somersaulted while moving. These two results can feel kind of random at first, but by this point, the game has given you time to understand how jumping works, and makes map traversal much smoother. So even if you're going through the same hallway for the 5th time, it can still feel fresh. Later Metroid games did this by having Samus become much more powerful by the time you return to these areas, but since Metroid NES can only afford so many upgrades, it pulls off this effect by taking advantage of you, the player, becoming more skillful instead, and I think that's great. I suppose the extra energy and missile tanks are just a nice bonus on top of that. Back into Norfair we go, and those dead ends don't seem so dead anymore. I will say that some of these passageways can feel a bit random, but the ones that do typically aren't that important or mandatory, just leading to a few missile tanks. The important ones are much better hinted at, like check this out. Using the ice beam, I can now climb up higher in this vertical shaft on the right end of the area compared to before. If I fire my ice beam at this wall, I can discover a secret passage that I can use the ice beam again to access. It leads to another ice beam. It's no different from the first one, and this room is inaccessible without it. Yeah, I'll admit this doesn't make much sense. Maybe another power-up was meant to be here or something, I really don't know. But if we continue bombing out passageways, we find a truckload of missiles and a really suspicious dead end. Yeah, I don't believe that for a second. It is when we get to Norfair that the environmental clues get a bit weaker, when I really think they ought to be stronger. Like, the only reason I'd think to bomb this floor is because the room would otherwise be a dead end, not because anything in the room itself indicates to bomb here. Sometimes bombing places seem to start a secret passageway, but actually lead to nothing. I don't really know how to feel about that. It just kind of discourages this sense of exploration that the game literally just encouraged us to engage in. This spot right here is by far the most egregious. The only indication of bomb here is if you just visited that dead end room we saw before, because this chunk of the vertical shaft is a carbon copy. The reason why I find it to be such a big issue is because this secret is completely mandatory for progression. This is the only way to reach 3 different upgrades in Norfair as well as Ridley's Lair, so unless we were to find this, we'd be stuck wandering in circles forever. As much as I've been willing to give Metroid NES today with this 3rd look, the cracks in its limitations are starting to show. Once you do find this passage though, exploring Norfair returns to being fun, though still pretty tough. We get the high jump boots, head through a mandatory ice beam room, and end up in... These sorts of bubble rooms tend to have secrets in their floors and ceilings. I wonder if... Oh! This passageway is, like the others, a little more cryptic than I would like, but finding it grants us our most powerful upgrade, the screw attack. Now, I will admit that most of the upgrades we've received so far felt more like tools rather than power-ups. We have more methods to explore Zebes, but exploration didn't get any easier. The screw attack, on the other hand, does make Samus feel more powerful directly. Most enemies are shredded to pieces just by jumping into them. Exploration actually does feel easier, and it feels like our curiosity is being rewarded in more unique ways than just another missile tank. Oh, and I guess there's also the wave beam down here. It makes enemies on the ground easier to hit, I guess, and it can shoot through walls, but it barely works half the time, makes it harder to detect secret passageways, and removes your much more useful and occasionally required ice beam, so just don't grab it. Eventually, enough exploration leads us to the deepest part of Zebes, Ridley's Lair in Lower Norfair. There's a pretty simple path you can take to get to Ridley, but choosing to explore instead will net you a few more upgrades. A really hard ice beam challenge to get over this wall, rooms that trick you before you can grab upgrades, rooms that trick you after you grab upgrades, and a whole lot of enemies, many of which require the screw attack to defeat in any sort of timely manner. I find it interesting how we're fighting Ridley now when we could have just as easily returned to Kraid's lair and fought him first. In fact, this game's remake, Metroid Zero Mission, actually requires you to do it that way. This game gives you the choice, as does Super Metroid to a less obvious extent. I like Metroid NES for doing that, for going all the way with its open-ended nature. Unfortunately, when we do find Ridley, his fight is incredibly underwhelming. I mean, he shoots fireballs in the same pattern every time, and it is incredibly easy to just tank hits and spam missiles. But hey, I guess that's one boss down with 50 missiles given to you on the spot, god damn! Before we head back to Kraid, I want to take another little detour real quick to the green area in Upper Brinstar again. While shooting at this enemy, it's possible you might find this passageway in the ceiling. The fourth rule of Metroid, doing its work right here. There's a door up here, but one that we couldn't reach at the time of our last detour through this area. Now, with the high jump boots, things are different. This leads to our final upgrade, the Varia suit. It cuts the amount of damage taken in half, which would have been really helpful back in Norfair. But now that we do have it, we've reached full power. At this point, thanks to all of our exploration, we've even maxed out on Samus's energy. Not much can stop us now. Except, I think that Kraid's lair remains quite tough, not for the right reasons. Most paths through the area are basically useless, wrapping around in circles with little more to find than a couple missile tanks. Rooms repeat themselves way too often, like it was a minor nitpick in Brinstar and a small issue in Norfair, but in the depths, it is impossible to tell where you are most of the time, just because of how few room layouts there actually are. And most annoyingly of all, getting attacked during room transitions. It's incredibly common here and completely out of your control. Few things are more frustrating in a video game than getting punished for something that wasn't your fault. Besides the fantastic music, Kraid's lair shows off the worst of Metroid NES. Its most confusing, its most frustrating, its least rewarding, and least fun aspects. And with being such an integral part of the progression, I can understand why this area left such a bad taste in my mouth back in 2022 that it significantly lowered my opinion on the game as a whole. But I don't think now that this area ruins the entire game completely, as it did for me back then. That's because, as little fun as this area is on a first playthrough, you'll be able to blast through it on any future playthrough, a topic we'll go into more detail on near the end of this video, which is already fast approaching. Kraid himself is painfully easy. Once you figure out that bombs are the only way to deal damage to him quickly, you can just tank hits and spam like you did with Ridley. At least with him down and another 50 missiles granted, there's only one place left to go. Now that we've returned to this room with the two bosses killed, the statues are flickering. Shooting them creates a bridge that finally leads us somewhere completely new. I hope you've got a lot of health and missiles coming here. It helps that energy tanks can be found immediately after both Ridley and Kraid's fights. Since these bring you to full health, it's as if the game was giving you a little boost so that you wouldn't feel the need to grind for health. That is, as long as you can carry that health all the way back to the statue room. You know, I've never had to grind for pickups at all during this playthrough, which is interesting because grinding was one of my biggest issues in my 2022 video. I feel like the way I've played the game this time around has kind of removed that sort of issue. Instead of farming to get to max health before starting a journey towards an intended destination, I've just been kind of killing enemies and getting their pickups during the journey so that I have more health by the time I've reached the destination, and I've kept moving along the whole time. This is probably why I don't feel drained by the time I enter Tourian, this game's final area. If anything, I feel ready. And I'll have to be ready because Tourian is hard. Even though it's just a few linear rooms, the two main enemies here will suck your health dry. One of them, literally. The titular Metroids finally make their appearance right before the end. They latch on you and quickly drain your energy, and you have to use bombs to shake them off. I'm glad that this is how you shake them as opposed to something more obtuse, because of course your reaction to getting latched onto is to panic and spam bombs. I'm not even being sarcastic here, that genuinely makes sense to me. To kill Metroids, you have to freeze them with the ice beam and then fire missiles, which is explained in the manual but also has been a behavior the game has trained you for when it comes to dealing with stronger enemies. Truly a well-designed final enemy type. What isn't a well-designed final enemy type is these Fruit Loop looking things called Rinkas, which spawn out of thin air, are freaking everywhere, get in the way of your shots, and don't even drop pickups. They're especially everywhere in the final room with Mother Brain, which is overall a bit over the top. You're constantly getting fired at from all directions with very little room to dodge. There's these weird tubes you have to destroy with missiles but keep regenerating over time. And once you actually do get to Mother Brain, there's very little room to actually shoot at her, with this lava pit that's almost impossible to escape from should you fall in. I'm not that big of a fan of this final room, and dying in Tourian is incredibly punishing. But should you persevere, Mother Brain will eventually go down. A bomb is set and it's time for us to get the hell out of here. The escape sequence is pretty simple, but works as an excellent setup for the insane ones we'd eventually see later on in the series. Once we do escape, we'll have finally completed the game, but our experience with Metroid NES doesn't stop there. because something that NES games can do really well is replayability. Starting a new game now lets us keep most of our upgrades, though not energy tanks or missiles, and with our knowledge of the map, Metroid NES becomes a whole other game on the second playthrough. And as we keep replaying this game, we'll get better and better, and the frustrations will start to slip away and give into fun through mastery. We'll plan out our routes through Zebes from the start, know exactly when and how to go for certain upgrades. We'll beeline it to Kraid, kill him quickly, and then zip around to Ridley. We'll time collecting energy tanks for when we need the health refills. We'll minimize the amount of missiles we actually need to collect, and we'll destroy Mother Brain faster than we ever could have the first time around. And it will not just be thanks to our knowledge or to the head start granted by New Game Plus, but because of our skill, because we got better at Metroid. And that skill is rewarded with a whole new experience that gives this game just as much longevity as Super Mario Bros. Itself. So, what has changed years later? Why was I wrong about Metroid NES? I think the main cause of my change in perspective is on how I played the game. The problem was that I wasn't playing Metroid like a Metroid game. I was playing it like a Mario game. This idea that my progression through Metroid was supposed to be a linear don't turn left experience. But I've come to realize that Metroid doesn't work like that. This wasn't a problem that occurred to me in other Metroid games because those games almost sort of silently force you not to play them like Mario games. Those games have intended paths of progression that want you to explore the map in certain ways to find what you'll need. And doing things out of order is allowed, but it's considered just that, a sequence break. Metroid NES doesn't do this. There is no order to exploration. There's no barriers to say, hey, you should try going this way first instead of entering this area now. It makes you decide to do that yourself. Metroid NES can't force you to play like a Metroid game. It can only try to guide you towards that. And if you do listen to its words and let yourself get lost in Zebes, you will find that Metroid NES is nothing short of genius for its time. With such demanding limitations, the developers behind this game managed to create an adventure that taught the player what they needed to know and allowed their own drive and skill to guide them through an entire planet's worth of discovery. This game, for all its flaws, managed to create not only a series of future masterpieces, but one of the most versatile and important genres in gaming today. And it did it all while still remaining a good game at its core. And with yet another entry in this long-running series now released, I am so glad that I decided to go back and give this game another shot, and I believe that you should all do so too. Replay this classic yourself one more time. Don't bother using a map on the internet, and just let yourself explore and let your own wits with the game's design guide you. Perhaps even make a map of your own, because I did, and I certainly didn't regret it. It may have taken me years to finally see Metroid NES for what it's truly worth, but I'm happy that I finally changed my mind.